I'm going to talk, as Pavla said, about the very last topic I had a chance to discuss with Dr. Vavřínek, who was always eager to help and generous to respond to my questions. So they came from an outsider to the field of Byzantine studies. And the topic concerns the one word mentioned in Vita Constantini, or Life of Saint Constantine, mentioned about the big-headed people. And I want to go through the evidence concerning this and offer slightly new interpretation of the place and show the possible literary archetypes for and its meaning in Vita itself. My interest in this topic stems from a curious fact that across my desk in my office, there is downstairs actually there's this picture hung up on the wall. It's part of a series of pictures by academic paintress Petra Fischerova. They depict the scenes from Vita Constantini back in the 90s, and here it depicts in a style of night art the set scene from the Vita Constantini with big-headed people living under the ground, and it's always startled me with its weirdness. So when I was doing my research on traces of anti-pagan discourse in various written sources, which is my main topic, I finally stumbled upon these big-headed people, Člověci velké hlavy. First of all, you all know that, but for the context, the old church Slavonic life of Saint Constantine was composed by his disciples, maybe by his brother Methodius shortly after his death. And together with telling the story of his upbringing and his education, his engagement in philosophical debates, it also retells the story of the two brothers coming to Great Moravia. And there, finally, there are some mentions of the Slavic pre-Christian religion, which interested me. As you know, in Great Moravia, Constantine was summoned to translate the sacred text into Slavic, not to Christianize Moravia, since Moravians had already rejected paganism and embraced the Christian law, as the Vita says, which is important for our case now, because this formal convention took place sometime after 831, and from a political and sort of linguistic perspective, it never proceeded smoothly under the authority of the Salzburg diocese in Moravia. What is interesting that in the context of the anti-pagan discourse in other medieval sources, the Vita Constantini refrains from demonizing Moravian paganism in any manner, and instead it portrays the activities of the Latin Frankish priests as actually being associated with the devil. And correspondingly, of course, the Frankish clergy in Great Moravia expressed their utmost displeasure with the Slavic mission and criticized Constantine's work. So due to this antagonism between the Frankish and the Slavic Byzantine clergy in Great Moravia, there appear passages in which the Vita mentions certain Frankish perversions or weird stuff which remain enigmatic. For example, a fantastic accusation is made that the Frankish priests supposedly did not hinder the continuation of sacrifices according to the custom or the formation of polygamous marriages. The criticism of idolatry and polygamy is by no means unusual in hagiography, it's very common, but the practice itself would be quite unexpected from Frankish priests. So it's more likely that this accusation is also a literary stereotype of limited empirical value. But most importantly, and also allegedly, I must say, the Frankish priests taught Moravian Christians that men with great heads live under the earth, a reptile is a creature of the devil, and that killing a serpent absolves one from 9 sins. As for the serpents, you can see the serpent being slaughtered here. This serpent killing superstition has been already interpreted as a possible echo of or a vague reference to the Bogomil heresy. It has been proposed by Ivan Duchev in 1954 and then discarded by Duchev himself in, 9 years later. The most important argument against the Bogomil theory is that, according to Duchev and also David Vira, with whom I consulted the issue, the Vita simply cannot contain echoes of Bogomilism because Bogomilism in this definition cannot be traced before 830s. So, as an alternative, Duchev himself proposed Agathias' Histories, chapter 24, where is a mention of Manichaeans in Persia killing a huge number of reptiles in a festival called Festival of the Slaying of the Evil Ones. So maybe Duchev thought that there could be a distant echo of these Manichaean festivals or their critiques in the Vita. I think we can maybe hypothesize that it could be an influence of Irish missionaries in Central Europe promoting St. Patrick's legendary slaying of all the snakes in Ireland, which is an allegory for St. Patrick banishing paganism. But we can be sure how this applies to the Moravian context, actually, because there is actually absolution of saints promised, so it's not clear. Nevertheless, it's quite clear that the Vita Constantini employs this criticism of snake killing as a theological insult or theological slur to Frankish priests, right? Whatever the origin of this idea was, it was considered a superstition by Byzantine clergy. So I will leave snakes aside for now, and let's have a look on the big-headed people finally. It's probably wrong to view this as a form of pagan survivals or a superstition of some kind, because the mention of strange people with big heads is most likely an allusion to medieval scholarly speculation regarding the antipodes, protopodes, and other mythological nations. Ivan Duchev himself, and after him also Zoe Hauptová, have attributed this motive to the influence of the Irish-Scottish mission, actually. Vladimir Vavrinek also shared this opinion, as he told me. And they all argued that the Bishop Virgil Vergilius of Salzburg, who was of Irish descent, his name was Virgil, was reprimanded by the Pope in the 8th century for his belief in the antipodes. The Pope wrote this in a letter to Saint Boniface, who was initially brassing on Vergilius that he believes in such things. And he says that if the report of his having spoken does be true, that is, that there are another world and other men beneath the earth. Alius mundus et alium homines. The context is that Zachary and Boniface were flat earthers, basically, since flat earth theory was an orthodoxy of the church at the time. So Virgil was a proponent of an alternative spherical cosmology, allowing to have antipodes. You need to have a spherical cosmology, antipodes living on the opposite side of the spherical globe. In his case, in Vergilius's case, this cosmology may stem, I think, from the Irish cosmological stories about journeys to the other world, which was located overseas or under the ground. Usually, there is a whole genre in Irish literature dedicated to this idea of these journeys. It's called Imrama. And this fairyland or other world can be Virgil's Alius Mundus reinterpreted in a Christian cosmology or Christian geographical speculation. In any case, this would be another Irish link in the alleged superstition mentioned by the author of the Vita. And it is conceivable that the Salzburg Virgilian tradition about antipodes was really somehow introduced to Moravia by Bavarian missionaries. Or at least it was known 100 years later that Virgil was of such an unorthodox opinion regarding the cosmology. But it is also worth noting the differences and problems with this interpretation, because in most known Latin and Greek medieval texts, the antipodes are described mostly as living with their heads down, if there's any word about their heads down and feet up. They are those with the feet opposite ours. So who is meant by the Člověci, the Veliklavy, the Vita Constantini remains uncertain. But I also think that it's fair to consider these big-headed people to be a reference to tales about mythical nations such as Dinokephaloi, Scythapodes, Antipodes, Dikephaloi, and others. And there are other worlds, they're exotic, unknown worlds. But since some sections of the Vita Constantini debates, philosophical debates exhibit a great literary sophistication, such as that the authors of the Vita pretty likely drew from Constantine's own Greek writings. I suggest that we can search for a Greek textual inspiration in this case as well. And I have tried to find mentions of the big-headed, long-headed people in the Greek literature. I have found several mentions about Macrokephaloi. First and foremost, from Strabo's Geographica, where it is said that when he comments on Hesiod, will anyone then accuse Hesiod of ignorance on accounts of his hemikines, his macrocephaly, and his pygmies, right? So they are macrocephaloi, but there is no mention of their place of dwelling, so to say. And the macrocephaloi appear also in Philostratus's Vita Apollonia, the Life of Saint Apollonius. This is a work where the philosopher Apollonius, which is Greek, Yara Zimmerman, person that was everywhere and invented a lot of stuff, engages in a discussion with an Indian sage in India, actually. And they debate the existence of people living under the earth and the macrocephaloi in the two passages. The first passage comes from the book number 3 in chapter 45. And it says, and he further asked about blah, 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 the men who live underground, right? Anthropomorphic hypogen, and the pygmies also, and the shadow-footed men. So we have the Sciapodes and other mythological nations, still no macrokephaloi here. So we must go to the chapter 47, where there is that the Indian sage is speaking about these nations. And as to the pygmies, he said that they lived underground, that they lay on the other side of the Ganges and so on. As to men that are shadow-footed, or have long heads, and as to the other poetical fancies, which the treatise of Skylax recounts about them, he said that they didn't live anywhere on the earth, at least of all in India. So at the end of the day, the Indian sage dismisses these notions as unfounded. But this passage in Vita Apolloni is the sole instance I have come across where the macrokephaloi and subterranean people, these again, these anthropoi, again, pygmies living under the earth, are mentioned simultaneously. This is the sole instance. And I would argue that we could discern an echo of this literary image in the Vita Constantini with its Člověci Veliklavy. And that it was used by Slavic clerics as an attempt to discredit the Frankish Latin priests. It must be said that when I discussed this problem with Dr. Vavrinek, he said that for him it's highly unlikely that Methodius or any of his pupils would have drawn direct inspiration from Philostratus's work, since no references to ancient Greek literature can be identified in the Vita Constantini. But I would argue that the Byzantine missionaries basically took the Virgilian tradition about the antipodes as an easy target for criticizing the Frankish clergy coming from Salzburg, where Virgil was the bishop. But when referring to this almost forgotten Virgilian heresy, the author of the Vita may summon from his mind a memory or recollection of his classical education, maybe a recollection of reading or hearing the Vita Apollonia or some similar authors writing about exotic mythical nations or weird stuff, and used it to illustrate this Virgilian antipode heresy. Dr. Vazine didn't consider it very plausible, but he was very eager to think that it might be the first such occurrence of Greek Byzantine literary influence in the Vita Constantini. First such connection to be identified, even though quite speculative. I'm looking forward to hear your thoughts on the issue, and thank you very much.